new world of darkness and evil.
Between July of the year 1963 and October of the year 1965, 5 separate children from in and around Manchester, England were abducted and brutally murdered. 2 of the victims' bodies were discovered in 1965, buried in shallow graves dug upon the Saddleworth Moor. A 3rd grave would also be discovered there, more than 2 long decades after the commission of the heinous crimes. Despite repeated searches by the authorities, however, at least 1 victim's body remains undiscovered to this very day. The moorland itself is very sparsely inhabited. It can be a bleak, brutal, desolate kind of place, one of the most unforgiving vistas that you could ever imagine. So today, join me as we journey out into this harsh, inhospitable environment and cover the brutal crimes that still make most Englanders sick to their stomachs. These are the Moor Murders.
You're a good fellow, if ever there was one, who's really deserved a wifely kiss.
The 1960s are sometimes referred to as, quote, the decade that shook Britain. Many drastic societal changes took place during these pivotal 10 years. I suppose you could say that if the 50s were more of the same boring old drab black and white, then the 60s were its antithesis, set in vibrant technicolor. In only 10 short years, the city of London evolved from a bleak and industrial, post-war conservative metropolis into a beacon of freedom for the whole world, full of energy, hope, and above all else, promise. This period became known as the Swinging 60s, during which the Beatles ruled the airwaves and the youth ruled the world. Although Britain itself was never directly involved in the Vietnam War, artists such as John Lennon helped bring it to the attention of the people. And so, as citizens for the very first time witnessed the depraved horrors of war for themselves, it led directly to a rebellious spirit of civil disobedience and general unrest in the population, which Ian Brady was born as Ian Duncan Stewart on January 2nd, 1938 in the Gorbals area of Glasgow to single mother Margaret Peggy Stewart, an unmarried tea-room waitress. The true identity of Brady's father remains unknown, although Peggy claimed that he was a reporter who worked for a Glasgow newspaper and who died 3 months before Ian was ever born. Peggy had little support and even less money, and unfortunately she was forced to give up her son just a few short months after giving birth to him. She left Ian in the care of Mary and John Sloan, a local couple who had 4 children of their own. Eventually, Brady took their name for his own and became known as Ian Sloan. However, his mother did continue to visit him throughout his childhood. At age 9, during a vacation with his adopted family, Ian discovered within himself an affinity for the outdoors, something that would last for his entire life. It's been asserted by various authors that Brady used to abduct and torture animals, although he himself has denied this on multiple occasions. It is well known, however, that the boy's behavior worsened drastically when he began attending Shawlands Academy, a school for above-average pupils. 2 different times throughout his teenage years, Brady was forced to appear before a juvenile court for breaking into homes. At age 15, Brady left school and took a job as a so-called T-boy at a shipyard in Govan. 9 months later, he would leave this job and start working as a messenger boy for a local butcher. Throughout this time, Brady had a girlfriend named Evelyn Grant. This relationship would progress normally until Ian would eventually threaten Evelyn with a knife for dancing with another boy. Obviously, this would result in him again appearing before court, this time with 9 separate charges leveled against him. However, the teenager would avoid any jail time, instead being placed on probation with the condition that he must live with his mother. By this time, Brady's mother had moved to Manchester and had married an Irish fruit merchant named Patrick Brady. This would lead to Ian eventually adopting his stepfather's surname. Despite the young man's new positive surroundings, however, he continued to get into trouble. Within just a year of moving to Manchester, Brady was caught with a sack full of lead seals that he'd stolen and was trying to smuggle out of the marketplace. For this crime of theft, he was sent to the Strangeways prison for 3 long months. Unfortunately, this brief imprisonment didn't seem to have any kind of reforming effect upon the young man, because over the next few years, Brady would continue to get into trouble and subsequently be in prison for short periods of time. However, things began to turn around a bit in the year 1959 when Brady applied for and was offered a clerical job at Millward's Merchandising, a wholesale chemical distribution company. And it was here that Brady would go on to meet the partner who would change his life forever.
Was an aging con of 65 who stood a chance to stay alive and leave the joints and walk the streets again. As the time he was to leave drew near, he suffered all the joy and fear of leaving 35 years in the pen.
Myra Henley was born on July 23, 1942 in Crumpsall to parents Nellie and Bob Henley. Myra was raised in Gorton, a working-class area of Manchester that was dominated by Victorian slum housing. Unfortunately, Myra's father was a chronic alcoholic who was often physically violent towards his wife and child. The family home was in very poor condition, and growing up, Henley was forced to sleep in a single bed right next to her parents' own double. The family's living situation worsened even further when Myra's younger sister was born in August of 1946. The following year, at age 5, Myra was sent to live with her grandmother nearby. Henley's father had served with the Parachute Regiment during the Second World War, and he was known as a hard man during his time in the military, and he expected his daughter to be equally tough. In fact, he taught Myra how to fight and insisted that she learn how to defend herself. For example, at age 8, a local boy scratched Myra's cheeks deep enough to draw blood. The little girl burst into tears and ran to her father for comfort. But instead of providing that comfort, her father instead threatened to quote-unquote leather her if she did not defend herself properly. And so Myra immediately went to find the boy and knocked him down with a flurry of punches. This incident would later lead Myra to write, quote, "At 8 years old, I'd scored my first victory." In June of the year 1957, one of Myra's close friends, 13-year-old Michael Higgins, invited her to go swimming with friends at a local reservoir. However, Myra instead went out elsewhere with a different friend group. Unfortunately, while swimming, Michael Higgins drowned in that reservoir. Myra, being a very good swimmer, blamed herself for this incident, and this is something that would cause her guilt for the rest of her life. Myra got her first job at a local engineering firm as a junior clerk. Her responsibilities included running errands, typing, and making tea, among other things. At age 17, Henley became engaged following a brief courtship, but decided to call it off just a few months in, coming to the realization that the young man was just too immature for her. In January of the year 1961, 18-year-old Myra would join Millwards as a typist, and this is where she would first meet and become infatuated with Ian Brady, the man who would change her life forever. How is it possible that in this huge, vast world of ours, full of literally billions of different people, two psychopaths manage to find each other in all of that chaos and fall in love, or whatever approximates love for two psychos? On the face of it, such a thing seems impossible, and yet here it happened. Ian and Myra met, fell in love, and began to form the toxic, codependent relationship that would ultimately lead them both to disaster. On July 12th of the year 1963, Brady informed Henley that he wished to commit the so-called perfect murder. Now, a normal person would have either tried to laugh this morbid confession off as just a bad joke, or they would have immediately left and even possibly informed the authorities of what their partner had said on their way out. Myra, however, did neither of these things. Instead, she immediately set out attempting to make Brady's sick desires a reality. So after work, Ian instructed Myra to drive a borrowed van around the area as he followed behind her on his motorcycle. The sick plan was that whenever Ian spotted a potential victim, he would then flash his headlights in order to inform Myra of their target. The pair were driving down Gorton Lane when Brady spotted a young girl walking down the road and signaled for Myra to stop. Henley, however, refused to stop due to the fact that she recognized the potential victim as the 8-year-old daughter of her mother's neighbor. This small act of mercy on Myra's part shows that at least this early on she had some moral boundaries that she would not cross. Unfortunately though, this semblance of morality would not last long. Sometime after 7:30 p.m. that same evening, while driving down Froxmore Street, still searching for potential victims, Brady spotted Pauline Reed as she was on her way to a local dance. Brady signaled for Henley to stop, and she proceeded to offer the 16-year-old a lift to the dance. Once Pauline was inside the van, however, Henley asked for the girl's assistance in searching for an expensive glove that she supposedly lost somewhere out upon the Saddleworth Moor. This doesn't seem like a particularly convincing ruse to me, but unfortunately it worked on Pauline, and so the two of them set off for the moor, with Brady following close behind. Henley explained away his presence to Pauline by claiming that he would be assisting them in their search for the glove. Henley would later attempt to claim that she waited behind in the van as Brady took Pauline out onto the moor alone. After 30 minutes had passed, Brady returned to lead Henley to where his teenage victim lay dying. Pauline's clothing was in complete disarray, and she'd been nearly decapitated by 2 vicious cuts to her throat. When Henley questioned Brady about whether or not he'd sexually assaulted his teenage victim before killing her, he responded with, quote, "Of course I did." Henley stayed with the body as Brady went to retrieve a spade that he'd hidden nearby on a previous visit. Henley then returned to the van as Brady buried the body. However, it's important to note here that according to Brady's own account, Henley was not only present for the attack, but had enthusiastically participated in the sexual assault. Regardless of the truth of the matter, it's obvious that at this point, the couple's codependent, toxic relationship had managed to hit new lows of depravity. These two were capable of anything, as we're just about to find out. Early on the evening of November 23, 1963, at a local market, Brady and Henley spotted 12-year-old John Kilbride, and in the young boy, the sick couple saw an easy target. Approaching him, Brady and Henley offered the boy a ride home, even going so far as to promise the preteen a bottle of sherry in order to sweeten the deal, and unfortunately he accepted. Once John was inside of Henley's rented Ford Angela, Brady informed them that they'd have to make a detour by their home in order to pick up the sherry. Once this errand was completed, however, Brady suggested yet another detour, this time one with a horribly familiar ring to it. Once again, Brady informed their young victim that Henley had lost an expensive glove somewhere out on the Saddleworth moor, and asked for the boy's assistance in finding it. I'm not really sure why they kept going with this particular ruse. To me, it doesn't sound especially convincing. But let's be real here. Ian and Myra weren't exactly the deepest of thinkers, now were they? Unfortunately, though, the fabrication worked, and when the group reached their destination, Brady took John out on the cold, barren moor, where he proceeded to sexually assault the 12-year-old and even attempted to slit the boy's throat with a 6-inch serrated blade before finally giving up and strangling the boy to death with a shoelace. Brady then proceeded to bury his victim's lifeless body in a shallow grave. And quite disgustingly, he then photographed Henley and her dog standing atop the disturbed earth that was only barely concealing the fresh corpse of their latest victim. You know, I've covered many heinous people over the course of running this channel, but these two have to be right up there at the very top. Or would it be down at the bottom? Whatever. The point is, they're scum, and I'm feeling kinda sick to my stomach. So let's just keep sludging on through this disgusting mess, shall we? Early on the evening of June 16, 1964, the demonic couple set their sights on yet another victim. And in doing so, they took themselves over that forbidden threshold and into the realm of full-blown legitimate serial killers. One of these sick, twisted people would have been scary enough on their own, but together they were an absolute nightmare. On that evening, a 12-year-old boy named Keith Bennett was on his way to his grandmother's house when Henley approached him, asking for assistance in loading some boxes into her vehicle, and afterwards offering to drive the boy home. However, along with the boxes, Brady was also in the back of the van, and tragically the same sick pattern would play out once again. Henley drove them all to the Saddleworth moor, supposedly in order to search for yet another lost glove. I mean, just how many gloves does this evil woman actually own? Perhaps her fingers are just as freezing cold as her dead heart. And so, still following the disgusting pattern, Brady took Keith out on the moor to search in vain for a glove that didn't exist. After about a half an hour had passed, Brady returned to the vehicle, carrying his trusty spade. In response to Henley's questioning, Brady admitted that he'd sexually assaulted the poor 12-year-old boy, before taking his life with the aid of a shoelace. Rest in peace, Keith. You didn't deserve what happened to you. None of you did. Now, you might think that with 3 victims under their belt, the twisted couple might slow down on committing their heinous crimes for a bit. But sadly, you'd be dead wrong. On the 26th of December of the year 1964, Brady and Henley noticed that 10-year-old Leslie Downey was apparently all alone at a local fair. To the predators that they were, this would signal an easy target. The twisted couple approached the little girl, deliberately dropping their shopping purchases so that they could ask the child for help with getting the packages back to their car, and eventually to their home. 10-year-old children are inherently trusting of all those around them, and unfortunately, predators like Myra and Ian can play upon that trust for their own sick purposes. Sadly, once again their plan worked to perfection, and the couple was able to get little Leslie back to their lair. Once the child was inside the home, she was undressed, gagged and bound, and forced to pose for undoubtedly disgusting photographs. Tragically, the 10-year-old girl was then sexually assaulted and killed. This time, however, the murderous pair sunk to even new lows, as an actual recording of the vicious attack was later discovered by authorities. Upon this tape, both Brady and Henley's voices can be heard as their victim begs and cries in the background. It's very harrowing stuff. Henley would later attempt to maintain that as she left to run a bath for the child, Brady killed her, with Henley only discovering the body upon her return. However, this account of events was once again disputed by Brady himself, who claimed that Henley had been the one to actually commit the murder. For me, it doesn't really matter so much whose actual physical hands did the killing. It's painfully obvious to me that they were both equally guilty of murder. The morning following the crime, the two drove their victim's body to the Saddleworth Moor and buried her in a shallow grave. On the evening of October 6, 1965, the evil couple would claim their final victim. That day, Henley drove Brady to the Manchester Central Railway Station, where she then waited outside in the car as Brady picked out a victim. After only a few minutes, Brady reappeared in the company of 17-year-old Edward Evans, an apprentice engineer from Ardwick, to whom he introduced Henley as his sister. The group then drove to Brady and Henley's home, where they relaxed over a bottle of wine. At a certain point in the evening, Brady sent Henley to go pick up her brother-in-law, who had been cultivating a friendship with his sister's husband. Soon, Henley returned with her brother, and told him to remain outside and wait for her signal, which was a flashing light coming from the home. When that signal arrived, the brother-in-law knocked upon the front door, and was soon met by Brady, who asked him if he'd come for, quote, the miniature wine bottles. Brady then left his brother-in-law in the kitchen, saying that he'd go collect the wine. The brother-in-law later gave the following statement to the police.
I waited about a minute or two, then suddenly I heard a hell of a scream. It sounded like a woman, really high-pitched. Then the screams carried on, one after another, really loud. Then I heard Myra shout, "Dave, help him," very loud. When I ran in, I just stood inside the living room, and I saw a young lad. He was lying with his head and shoulders on the couch, and his legs were on the floor. He was facing upwards with Ian standing over him, facing him, with his legs on either side of the young lad's legs. The lad was still screaming. Ian had a hatchet in his hand. He was holding it above his head, and he hit the lad on the left side of his head with the hatchet. I heard the blow. It was a terrible, hard blow. It sounded horrible.
The brother-in-law then watched, transfixed in horror, as Brady strangled Evans to death with a length of electrical cord. David Smith, Brady's brother-in-law, agreed to return the following morning to help transport the victim's body to the Saddleworth Moor in order to dispose of it. Afterwards, he returned home around 3 a.m. and immediately asked his wife to make him a cup of tea. David proceeded to drain his cup before violently vomiting and tearfully confessing to his wife what he'd just witnessed. Finally, at long last, this event would prove to be the beginning of the end for good old Ian and Myra. At 6:10 a.m. that morning, David armed himself with a screwdriver and a bread knife, just in case Brady attempted to intercept him, and went to call the police from a nearby phone box. Following this, David was picked up by a police car and driven to the Hyde police station, where he informed officers about everything he'd seen the previous night. Bob Talbot, the police superintendent, then immediately went to Brady and Henley's home, accompanied by a detective sergeant. Wearing a bread delivery man's uniform, Talbot, standing at the back door, asked Henley if her husband was home, to which she immediately denied even having a husband, which I guess was technically true. They weren't married. Upon hearing this, Talbot identified himself. Henley then led the man into the living room where Brady was lying on the couch. The officer explained that he was investigating, quote, an act of violence involving guns that was said to have taken place at the home the previous evening. Initially, Henley denied outright that any violence had occurred at all, even allowing the officers to freely look around the home, presumably in search of evidence. However, when the police asked for the key to the locked spare bedroom, Henley initially refused, claiming that she left it at her workplace, before Brady ordered her to just hand it over. And when the police finally opened the door to the room, they discovered Evan's lifeless, brutalized body, and Brady was immediately arrested on suspicion of murder, although he claimed that Evans was only in that state because of an argument between the two that had turned physical. Although Henley was not initially taken into custody, she demanded to accompany Brady to the police station. However, she outright refused to make any official statement concerning Evan's death, beyond that it was from the result of an accident, and was even allowed to return home, on the condition that she returned to answer questions the following day. And over the course of the next few days, Henley would visit with her employer, asking to be dismissed from her position so that she would become eligible for unemployment benefits. Meanwhile, the police were uncovering more and more damning evidence against the pair, and becoming more and more convinced that Henley was actually directly involved in the murder, as well as the couple possibly being responsible for the deaths of many other victims. And so, on the 11th of October, Henley too was arrested and taken into custody. At first, she was charged with only being an accessory to Evan's murder, and was remanded to Risley Prison. While all this was taking place, police who were searching the couple's home discovered an old exercise book with the name John Kilbride written in it, making them suspect the couple's involvement in the disappearances of the other children. At first, Brady stuck to his story that he and Evans had fought, but insisted that it was he and David Smith that had actually murdered the teenager, stating that Henley had, quote, only done what she'd been told. Throughout this time, more and more evidence was being uncovered by the authorities, including 9 pornographic photographs of a young girl, soon identified as Leslie Downey, completely naked with a scarf tied around her mouth, as well as 16-minute audio recording of a girl identifying herself as Leslie Ann Weston, screaming, crying, and begging to be allowed to return home to her mother. Truly just awful stuff. Downey's mother would later confirm that the images and recordings were those of her late daughter. I can't even imagine the amount of bravery that action took. After making inquiries of several different neighbors, the police were able to pinpoint the evil couple's favorite spots along A635 Road in the Saddleworth Moor. Immediately, police began to search the area, and on the 16th of October, they discovered an arm bone sticking up out of the peat, which would be identified as that of Downey's the next day. After finding yet more of Brady's sick photos in an old suitcase, the authorities appealed to the locals for assistance in finding the locations to match the photographs. And on the 21st of October, this led them to discover the badly decomposed body of John Kilbride, which his mother was forced to identify by just clothing alone. The search for the bodies of further victims would continue for the next few months, before finally being called off in November with the weather worsening upon the moors. Presented with all of this overwhelming evidence, Brady admitted to being the one who'd taken the photographs of Downey, but adamantly insisted that she'd been brought to their home by 2 mysterious men, who, following the pictures being taken, took the girl away with them when they left, with her being very much still alive. This story was ludicrous, and the authorities didn't buy it for a second. Despite his lies, by the 2nd of December that same year, Brady had been officially charged with the murders of Kilbride, Downey, and Evans. Henley, on the other hand, was charged with the killings of Downey and Evans, as well as being an accessory to the murder of Kilbride. The 14-day trial began in a specially prepared courtroom before Justice Fenton Atkinson on the 19th of April of the year 1966. The dock in the courtroom was actually fitted with bulletproof glass in order to protect the lives of the defendants due to the overwhelming public outrage surrounding the case. The prosecution was led by the Attorney General, Sir Elwyn Jones, who was assisted by William Mars Jones. Both Brady and Henley entered pleas of not guilty. Brady ended up testifying in his own defense for over 8 hours, and Henley for 6. Grudgingly, Brady admitted to hitting Evans with a hatchet, but once again insisted that it was someone else who had actually killed the teenager, pointing to the pathologist's sworn statement that his death had been, quote, accelerated by strangulation as proof. Brady's obvious narcissism and his calm, undisguised arrogance certainly did not endear him to the jury. As so often is the case, Brady's testimony hurt his defense more than it helped. The full 16-minute tape recording of Downey, on which the voices of both Brady and Henley were clearly audible, was played in open court for the jury to hear. Henley once again tried to deflect responsibility for her crimes by claiming that she'd been downstairs while Downey was being undressed and assaulted. On the 6th of May, after deliberating for a little over 2 hours, the jury found Brady guilty of all 3 murders he was charged with, and Henley guilty of the murders of Downey and Evans. Unfortunately, however, the death penalty for murder cases had been abolished just 6 months prior to the verdict, and so the judge passed the harshest sentence that the law allowed: life in prison. Brady was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, and Henley was handed down 2. Subsequently, Brady was taken to HM Prison Durham, and Henley was sent to HM Prison Holloway. In his closing remarks, the judge referred to the murders as, quote, truly horrible, and the 2 accused as, quote, sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. He further recommended that they both spend a very long time in prison before even being considered for parole, but did not stipulate a specific tariff. In November of the year 2007, Brady became the longest-serving prisoner in England and Wales. After receiving end-of-life care, Brady passed away of restricted pulmonary disease at Ashworth Hospital on the 15th of May, 2017. Henley had been told that she should spend at least 25 years in prison before even being considered for parole, but in 1985 that was bumped up to 30 years. However, after confessing to being involved in more murders than she originally admitted to, Henley was given a whole life tariff in July of 1990, meaning that she would most likely die in prison. And on the 15th of November of the year 2002, Henley, at age 60, passed away from pneumonia at the hospital. Unfortunately, though, Keith Bennett's body remains undiscovered to this very day. For the next segment, we're gonna hand it off to my friend Ryan from the YouTube channel Horror Bloody Horror. He covers pretty much everything horror related over there, so if you're a fan of horror in general, go check it out. The link will be in the description.
F5 tornadoes are feared more than any other storm on the face of the earth, and rightfully so, with their huge size, devastating wind speeds, and great gaping ravenous maws. Each of these storms is like a beast summoned up to our world from the bowels of the underworld itself. I mean, just one of these monsters can wreak untold havoc and deal out disastrous damage on a level that's truly unparalleled. They quite literally leave nothing in their wake but utter destruction. Now, just try and imagine 2 F5 tornadoes side by side, shoulder to shoulder, bearing down upon the small town. There'd be absolutely nothing left. The great maw of that ravenous beast would have devoured everything in sight for miles around. And this is how I personally view both Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, and what they did to the community of Manchester. Just two natural disasters colliding and leaving nothing but shattered lives behind, broken families left to try and pick up the pieces. After all, those two were quite terrible in their own right, but together, well, they become something else entirely. However, despite their positively sickening actions, there's just no denying the fact that the psychology behind their relationship is utterly fascinating. These two parasites fed off of each other, with both only growing more and more monstrous as time went on. The photographs and tape recordings of their victims' torture, as well as their blasé, nonchalant reactions to them when they were played in court, only helped to ensure the couple's lasting notoriety. Brady, who publicly stated multiple times that he wished to never be released from prison, was rarely ever mentioned by the press. Myra, however, with her insistent desire to get out of prison, became a figure of public hatred. Hindley's direct hands-on role in the heinous crime was also a severe violation of the gender norms of the times. Remember, this was the 1960s, so in the eyes of the press and the public, this made her a, quote, poster girl for all kinds of different moral panics over the years. The photo of her shortly after her arrest was reprinted in the press so often that it managed to achieve an almost mythical quality to it. Despite Brady being the obvious ringleader of the two, it was Myra who received the majority of the public's ire, with her own mother even stating on the record that her daughter should die in prison. In the year 1987, the Manchester City Council decided to demolish the home where Brady and Hindley had lived, and where the two different victims tragically lost their lives, citing excessive media interest as the reasoning behind it. The couple's overwhelming notoriety had even spread into pop culture over the years as well. For example, in 1977, author Edward Gorey wrote a novel titled The Loathsome Couple, which was inspired by the case. Manchester-based band The Smiths wrote a song called Suffer Little Children for their 1984 self-titled debut album, which was also inspired by the real-life killings. And finally, the case was also featured on two separate television dramas from the year 2006, See No Evil, The Moors Murders, and Longford. It's truly tragic that two such twisted people managed to destroy so many lives before finally being stopped. My only hope is that with justice being served in this case, it perhaps brought some peace and closure to all of the families involved. Sadly though, even after 6 long decades, there's no real getting over the loss of a loved one, especially one who was taken from you so brutally.
The universe is made up of many things. Asteroids, meteors, moons, planets, stars, galaxies, black holes, and more than anything else, vast, empty space. As we stand upon our little patch of Earth, in our little corner of the world, we're actually hurtling through space at a mind-blowing speed of 400,000 miles per hour. You know, it's quite ironic that the more knowledge we accumulate concerning the inner workings of the universe, the more we realize just how tiny and insignificant we really are in the grand scheme of things. So what exactly is our place in this vast, unknowable universe? Do our lives really matter at all? Or are we just a collection of cells and flesh, doomed to pass away and be forgotten forever? I personally believe that we only truly die when people quit uttering our names. And in this way, through videos like these, through our own personal research, we can help keep the memory of the victims alive. After all, they were human beings. They were people, not just a collection of cells hurtling through the universe, but living, breathing miracles of evolution. Someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's favorite person in the entire world. And I am here to say that they are more than just their violent ends. Yes, I know. For videos like these, we cover the horrific crimes that led directly to the end of their lives. But I just want to take a moment to remember that they were more than that. More than a statistic. More than a true crime video on YouTube. More than the worst day of their lives. More than a victim.